This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine all the time, let it shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine all the time, let it shine. Good evening, welcome to Kids Corner this evening. Hope you're having a great week. I've been, recorded this morning, by the way. I've been drinking coffee. I like coffee and have coffee most mornings. Maybe your house, your mom and dad have coffee most mornings. You have a coffee maker that sits on the counter where they make their coffee. Maybe that's a part of their morning routine every morning. A lot of people do that, and then a lot of people, it's a very important part of their day to make coffee and have a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee to get their day started. Some people have a hard time getting going without drinking coffee. Well, it sure tastes good. But the interesting thing about people who feel like they need to get started, get their day started with a cup of coffee is that they have to go through a process to get there. And when you want coffee, you can't just necessarily go to the refrigerator and get out a jug and pour yourself a tall glass of coffee. There are iced coffees, cold coffees, but generally for a fresh cup of coffee, there's a whole process that you have to go through. You have to take your coffee pot, you have to dump out the old coffee from the day before into the trash can and rinse it out good, put more water in it, and a new filter in, and put some more coffee grounds in there, and then put it back together, and then you push the button, and then you have to wait for the coffee to slowly drip down through the coffee grounds and fill the pot back up. And so you can imagine sometimes how frustrating it might be for people who desperately need their coffee, and they really can't get their day going without it, and have to wait as long as a whole 5 minutes to get their coffee so they can begin their work for the day. And I kind of say that jokingly, but think about that process, or anything that you have to wait for a little bit of time for when you're anxious. And then think about this. Imagine waiting for 40 years to get started on your work or on something that you really want or need to do. That's the story of Moses. And most of you know the story of Moses. It's begins in the book of Exodus in your Old Testament. But that's the story of Moses. He was the guy that led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. But he had to wait 40 years before he got to do that. I don't know if you remember that part of the story. He was raised by Pharaoh's daughter in the palace, had a great life as far as that goes, everything you could ever imagine, the best food, best clothes, those kinds of things. But he was an Israelite. He'd been adopted by the Pharaoh from an Israelite woman, and he was well aware of that. He knew that he was an Israelite because his mother was able to help raise him in the palace as a slave woman. Moses, he saw that the Egyptians were treating the Israelites terrible, and he wanted to help them. In fact, one day he got angry because an Egyptian was assaulting an Israelite man, and he got mad about it, and so he killed him. And now violence wasn't a part of God's plan for Moses. He didn't want that for him. He had a different plan for him, but that action led Moses to leave, or to flee, to run away from Egypt and live in exile as a shepherd. And so he went from living in the palace and this grand life to living out in the wilderness as a shepherd, shepherding sheep. Lived out there, in the wilderness, far from, the grandeur of the palace in Egypt, tending sheep for his father-in-law. He got married while he was out there in the wilderness. And then one day, 40 years after that event, he was out shepherding his sheep, and he saw a burning bush up on the mountain, and he went up to see it, and noticed that the bush wasn't burning up. It was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. It wasn't being destroyed by the fire. And God talked to Moses through that bush. This part is in Exodus chapter 3, and you can go read that with your parents tonight. And God told him through the bush to return to Egypt to save his people. And so he did. He obeyed. He argued with God a little bit, but he obeyed God, and he went with his brother Aaron. And God orchestrated the 10 plagues through Moses and his brother Aaron to convince the Egyptians to let his people go. And it's an amazing story to read and to imagine all those things that happened to convince the Egyptians, and they were really hard-headed to let the Israelites go. And that was God's ultimate plan for Moses, was to lead his people out of Egypt. But he had to wait 40 years before God used him for that plan. God has a plan for all of our lives. For some people, those plans are difficult to see, and sometimes it's hard to wait on God to see what it is he wants us to do or needs us to do. But for other people, that God's plan is super clear to them. But whether God gives you a clear calling or whether he makes you wait a little bit for certain things, just remember the story of Moses. Sometimes he has a reason for making us wait on things. He wants us to wait. And we need to wait on God and let him tell us when it's time to act. Because sometimes maybe he's preparing us a little bit more for what he needs us to do. Maybe it's that he's preparing somebody else for us to be in their life and to help them in some way. We don't get to see all of those different things. Our calling, what we're asked to do or told to do by God, is to wait on him and to listen to him and to let him tell us when it's time to move or time to act or time to do something. And so sometimes it's easy to think we have it all figured out, but we need to be careful about that, because God sees a lot of things that you and I can't see. And so we need to be careful about thinking we have things all figured out. We need to be talking to God and asking God and listening to God help us to figure those things out and listen to him when he leads us to do or go do different things or go different places or talk to different people. We need to wait on God. And when we do that, we'll be amazed at his perfect timing for things, how he takes care of things in our life. Go back and read that story, starting in Exodus chapter 1 with your mom and dad, and spend the next week or so reading through the story of Moses and the exile of the Israelites out of Egypt. It's a great story, and it'll just show you how awesome God is and how awesome God's timing is. Hope you are having a great week. Hope you have a great rest of your week tonight. Thank you for joining me on Kids Corner tonight. And until next week, we'll see you later.